Nothing wrong with that. So here's a good one as we kind of get started. Good morning, everyone. How are you? We'll give everyone a chance to join us. So here's a good, because you guys already started the conversation, so I'm going to keep it going. Here's another do and don't. During the Our Father, should we do this or no? What do you think?
No.
Well, I know what you think, and I know what you're going to say. I'm asking everyone because we see kind of a smattering when we go to Mass, right? If some people put their hands up, some people don't. What do you guys think?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because I think the priest does it because he's offering our prayers to God.
Okay. Very good. So, okay, Father gave away the answer. So, Father, can you do me a favor? Can you, as we kind of jump into this discussion, explain when you do this, when you're doing this motion, can you explain what that is and the purpose behind it?
Yes. It's called orens position. Orens. Orens is the Greek word for prayer. So the priest is in prayer position, and it is the priest who offers the prayer for the people. The priest is the connection between the people and God. And so he's the one, and there's a place in the Old Testament where they had two guys hold up Moses' hands to God so that God would not desert them. So they actually held Moses' hands up in Orens position so that he would be praying constantly. So it's the priest who connects the people to God. And kind of interesting, in the Tridentine Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, when the priest says, "Let us pray," bless you, whoever sneezed. When the priest says, "Let us pray," the deacon and the subdeacon get behind him to show the connection between the priest and the people. So it's almost like they're holding their hands back and connecting everyone to the priest who's offering the prayer, ultimately offering the sacrifice to God on their behalf.
And I think what happened is, as the Mass has kind of changed and evolved a little bit, when priests started facing the people and took the orans position, some priests kind of started doing this thing where their hands went out like this, and then we, because this is who we are as people, we mirror the things that we see. Yeah. So we're mirroring what the priest does, and we think that we should be doing that. And it's an interesting thing to think about, because there's certain things in the Mass that are meant for everyone, but then there are certain things in the Mass that are meant for just the priest, but then there are also certain things in the Mass that are meant just for us. So it's really important to keep that stuff in mind when we talk about liturgy. So yeah, I guess we don't do the hands out thing because we're not supposed to do the orans. Interestingly enough, because Father has some history and some background in the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church, do me a favor. When you do the sign of the cross, how do you do the sign of the cross? Everybody, how do you do it? You go up, down,
right hand,
right hand, up, down, left, right, right? But when the priest blesses us, he does an up, down, left, right.
Yep.
But in the Eastern Church, they will go up, down, right, left, because they are mirroring the blessing that the priest gives. So they're actually mimicking the exact same movement. So instead of us doing the same thing he's doing, you would be mimicking the thing that he's saying. It was interesting. I learned that when we have friends of ours in Arizona who go to a Ukrainian Catholic church, and I learned that from going to Mass at the Ukrainian Catholic church, which is kind of cool.
And of course, they're on the other side of the world too.
Mm-hmm. So it goes backwards.
So it's it's
like
not backwards. It's not backwards to them.
It's like how toilets spin the other way in Australia.
Exactly. Below the equator, toilets flush the other way.
Right.
That's
that'll
the
be
factoid for today.
Yeah,
exactly.
Did you know that? Did you know that the toilets flush the other way below the equator? I love it.
Horses go the other way in a racetrack too, in
Yeah.
Europe and in.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
all
like
it's
in
all
the
right
English,
turns.
the English drive on the left side of the street.
So do a lot of us here.
Yeah, well, that's yeah. There's a few old ladies in Salve that drive on the left side of the street.
I'm glad you
Looking
said
forward.
Salve, Father.
What?
You tell him, Patty.
And drive into your beauty shop, and you wonder if they're going to drive through the front window, right?
Someday, yes.
I know. It's amazing.
Self-driving cars.
Yeah.
You're still on mic.
That's all right. Telsa.
Well, right on. So that was a good way to kind of start the conversation, something for us to keep in the back of our mind, because we have a great topic today for Coffee Talk, talking about is faith private? Is our faith private? And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. I wanted to give really quick, I know there's not a whole ton to give you guys an update about, but I wanted to give Father a chance to share anything he wanted to share, and Lori as well. I don't know if Betty's going to be able to join us this morning, but if she does, we'll obviously have her say hi when she gets on with us. But Father, anything you wanted to share out as we get started today?
It's because you're in the middle.
We're just starting to, we've started to do communion at the normal time to try to kind of normalize the Mass. And so we're doing communion. We did today at Mass. Yesterday, we did communion at the normal time, and then people are going back, to the pew, and so it's not so abrupt. I just felt it was so abrupt to receive communion and walk out of the building with the Eucharist in your mouth. I didn't like that at all. I knew, I understand what they were trying to do, but I just didn't think that was a good idea. So we're doing communion at the normal time. And we're still, sanitizing. So at daily Mass, and I think that's working fine. I don't think it's a problem. But that would be, one of the things. So a little more normal, the flow of the Mass.
Yeah. No.
I'm still a little concerned that that people are still afraid. I think that people don't need to be so afraid if they handle it correctly. So I think if they handle it correctly, coming, wearing a mask, keeping the mask on, like I saw some people at Mass on the weekend and they took their masks off. And I think that's very irresponsible from what we know. We should keep your mask on, and believe me, I don't like wearing one either, but it keeps others safe too. And, who knows, that's the primary way that we're protecting people from contracting the virus, is wearing masks. So, I think we should respect that. People have been good with social distancing. I repeat that I love people evenly distributed in the church. That is so nice to have people like spread out nicely. I feel like everyone is facing the same place rather than in clumps. So I like that. Other than that, I think we're just waiting it out to see where numbers are going locally and statewide. And, there's some ominous statistics coming from other places where it's not going down, but and I think there are reasons for that. I think that people are not observing the protocols, and therefore where they're not observing the protocols, you're going to have spikes in numbers of people contracting the virus. But other than that,
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're doing the best that we can to keep everyone safe, and I believe that, I mean, as far as what I can see, and maybe some other places, we're doing above and beyond to make sure that everybody's staying safe and staying healthy. So we invite you to come back. But obviously, if you feel like you can't yet, or maybe it's just not quite the time, we're still offering Mass online. Keep using that if you want. You're still able to do so. Lori, what did you have? Did you have anything that you wanted to share about anything that's going on?
Again, not too much to report. We are still doing the registration and ushering for the weekend masses. And we would just ask people to please, like Father said, when you enter the building, make sure you have your mask on. People are entering without a mask and then putting it on in front of us. That's not safe. And then when they are ushered to a seat, please just go to the seat the usher directs you to. People are getting up once they're seated and moving to a different seat, which again is cross-contamination and defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do. But otherwise, a lot of people are coming in. They're very thankful to be there. They feel very safe. Again, we have a great group of people who are helping us out with registering and ushering, and we're very thankful to them. As far as the office, we're here answering the phone. You can get mask intentions, mask cards, anything you need, just give us a call and we can make it happen for you.
Well, there you go. I mean, things are kind of starting to be business as usual for us, and that's a good thing, a little bit of a return to some normalcy. So keep staying with us. For those of you who are able to join us in person on Sunday, thank you so much for coming to welcome Laura and Robert into the church. We got to confer that our Father was able to baptize and confirm and give First Holy Communion to two of our RCIA catechumens. So Robert and Laura received their sacraments, which is awesome. And Marge Sapka, who is our third, is going to receive hers this weekend. So continue to pray for them and make sure you show them some love, because we want them to stay connected and stay loved by the church. So keep praying for them. So that's really kind of where we're at as far as business at the parish. And so really quick, before we kind of dive into today's topic, I wanted to give anyone a chance. I know that maybe you guys were asking some questions as we started about liturgy and stuff, but any questions that you guys want to ask, whether it's about what we're doing at the parish or just random thoughts that popped into your, like I used to call them shower thoughts, because every once in a while, like I'd be in the shower and I'd think like a weird thing. I'd be like, I wonder about that. And then I kind of forgot about it. So if you have like a weird shower question that you want to ask, go for it, because we want to make sure that we, because this is a conversation. It's not just us flapping our heads. So if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask Father or Lori or Carlos or myself or whatever, I invite you guys to ask questions if you want. Does anybody have anything they wanted to try and go over before we kind of jump into our discussion today? No? Yeah? Come on, don't be shy. All right. All right. You're good Catholics. You're sitting in the back. You're being quiet. That's good. All right. So talking about our topic today. So Father had the topic of covering, is faith private? Which is a really interesting question. And so I kind of I'm just going to turn the wheel over to Father. And I don't know, I think maybe Carlos is helping out with this too. So I wanted to kind of talk about that discussion. Is faith private? So Father, what do you got for us?
well, the older I get and the longer I live the priesthood, the more I ponder that question, the relationship between the private and communal aspects of religion. And I understand that a lot of contemporary religiosity is kind of private, you know, and yet at the same time, if you read the New Testament, there's probably very little, if any, private aspect to New Testament Christianity. And see, that fascinates me. Like, for instance, today at Mass, the reading was from Matthew's Gospel. And Matthew is showing us how Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. He's the fulfillment of everything that was revealed to the Jewish people. And what Jesus is, this sender. He's a teacher, he's a sender, he's a communicator, he's a mover. And Jesus very often said, okay, let's move on, let's continue the mission. And mission, by its very nature, can't be private. So, you know, so the whole New Testament understanding of Christianity is really communal. St. Paul wrote to the infant churches as communities. The letters of St. Paul are completely a commentary on community life. The pastoral epistles, you know, at the end of the New Testament are all addressing issues that were experienced by the community. And so how did we get to this, people saying, well, my religion is private, and or how did we get to be almost at times anti-community in terms of religion, the practice of religion? Yeah, I mean, does that resonate with anyone? Because actually that question is really the most fundamental question on the future of the church. And where the church will be successful is where people will build community and sustain community. Where the church will become extinct is where people will say, my religion is private. And I think that's, I mean, dispute me. Let's debate that if you want. But that seems to be what's happening. So, I mean, how do people resonate with that? Does it make any sense to any of you?
Yeah, go ahead, Walt. What do you got?
I think that when you say private, I think there's no way that you can evangelize if you keep it private.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think it's almost like people who belong, just for lack of thinking of anything now, but who belong to a private country club or a golf club that's private.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't look at it. I mean, as I said, in order to evangelize, you can't keep it private. It has to be out there for everybody. But I think the other thing I think you have to look at is it personal? Yes, it's very personal, but it's not private. That's the way I look at it.
So yeah, you bring up a really good point. So what's the relationship between personal and private, or personal and communal? That's a really important distinction that I don't completely understand. What do you think about that, Walt?
Well, I think that personally, personally is very deep within your soul. It's very, very deep rooted, where private is private. Let me get my thoughts here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Private
Yeah.
could be between a group of people also, just
Yeah.
in a country club, okay? Where it's
Yeah.
a private group. You know, you have secret handshakes or whatever, okay? In secret societies, it's still private.
Like the Masons or the, yeah.
So I don't probably have a real good answer for that, Father.
Yeah, well, me either. But you see the problem that kind of thing creates, you know, in terms of understanding, and why, you know, why we're having, why a lot of Catholics hate the word evangelization. They associate it with you know, fundamentalist Christians coming up to people and saying, you know, are you saved? You know, or if you don't do this or that, you're not saved. And so they associate evangelization with Christian fundamentalism rather than, you know, rather than serious interaction about the salvation of one's soul. You know, in other words, we're not comfortable ever saying, you know, I'm concerned about your soul. You know, because I said that to a person, and the person said to me, my soul's none of your business.
Wow.
But you see where that came from. Oh no, see, this is the contemporary problem. This is the contemporary dilemma, that rather than seeing what I said as an act of love, they saw it as an act of intrusion. You see the difference? When I said I care about your soul, they took it as like I want to get into you too personally, rather than, you see, because people are so, personalism has just gobbled us up so much. And so I think, you know, people are concerned about being intrusive, but at the same time, people, you know, scream when they feel they're not loved enough. So, you know, because people are so self-indulgent, they want to be made of, you know, a lot. But yet, if you care about what's really important, you know, if you give them superficial adulation, then they get nervous. I don't know.
Well, I think it's also really difficult too, and if you look at things from like I hate to be divisive and putting it into a Protestant versus Catholic perspective, but I think that like when you like in Matthew 6, Jesus gives instruction about prayer and about fasting and about giving alms, and that's actually where we get the text from the Our Father, because he says when you pray like this, and I think that is where Protestant theology draws the idea of a personal relationship with Jesus, which absolutely we should have a personal relationship with Jesus. But that is where it kind of divulges into the idea of a private relationship with Jesus, that it's not something that you should be sharing with other people. And it comes down to what Father just mentioned, that intrusive nature, like that's none of your business. And where we start conflating our soul, like the state of our soul, with what's going on in our lives. And those things are very intimately connected, but it becomes this thing that people think like, oh, we're going to judge them. But it talks about in Matthew 6, it says that when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who like to stand and pray in the synagogues and on street corners so that others see them. They've received their reward. But when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret. And so I think it's important for us to realize that what Jesus is trying to teach us when we talk about the context of something like Matthew 6 is he's actually teaching us about discipline when it comes to our faith life, that we shouldn't make it some sort of performance, that it isn't something where we're trying to gain people's adulation or admiration for what it is that we're trying to do. We do it simply out of love, that it's not because we're trying to perform for somebody else. But it doesn't stop there. Like, we don't stop with the private prayer in our secret room. We go out publicly and do the work that needs to be done. Thoughts? Yeah, Lori.
Do we think that people associate evangelization with defending our Catholic faith or beliefs? And human nature is people tend to shy away from confrontation because they want everything to be, unicorns and rainbows, and they don't want to have confrontational conversations with people. So people tend just to shy away from those conversations and not go out, evangelize, talk about our faith, because they don't want to get involved with maybe uncomfortable conversations.
Well, first of all, Father, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this. I don't know if there's any definitive teaching within the catechism that says that unicorns and rainbows aren't okay. I think we're allowed to have unicorns and rainbows. I like unicorns and rainbows. Maggie likes unicorns and rainbows. So
No, Adam,
I know, I'm
meant
joking. I'm joking.
People just want to go along in life and pretend everything is just fine.
Yeah, no,
Maybe wasn't a good scenario, but
no,
they want everything, everybody think their life is fine, everything is fine.
It was more of a joke because I think unicorns and rainbows are cute. No, I think that's a really good point. And I think that maybe it's a really good discussion for us to have about distinguishing evangelization, sharing the faith, and apologetics, defending the faith. Because I don't know about you guys, but I have never been successful in trying to bring someone into relationship with Jesus by arguing with them about theology and doctrine. Because most of the people I'm having those kinds of conversations with aren't properly disposed to be having big conversations about the Eucharist or Mary and stuff like that. These things that are so crucial to our Catholic faith. And when I jump headlong into trying to catechize and argue about things about Catholicism, I just see people's eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
So, especially the people I want to reach. And so then what does that look like? What does it look like to you guys? Father, what does it look like to you to actually evangelize? And how do we start properly compartmentalizing how we evangelize and then how we defend? Because I think those things are they're interconnected, but I think they're two very distinct things.
People learn to like certain things.
Uh-oh. I think Father froze for a second. Well, okay. Well, we wait for him to come back online. That's okay. We can continue to have a conversation with ourselves. Carlos, do you have any thoughts about how do we start looking at evangelization and apologetics?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is meeting people where they're at. You know what I mean? I was very fortunate to go on a mission trip to Haiti last year, and it was one of the most great experience of my life. And there was a lot of evangelization into that. And one thing that, the missionaries there will tell you is, meeting people where you're at, your mission field isn't always going to be in Haiti, like by the grace of God, I was able to go, but your mission field is in your home. It is in your schools. It is at your job. It is on the sidewalk, in the streets, in your churches. And it's our responsibility, to just share. And I always say that, my favorite way to evangelize is just the way you live your life. Sometimes the way you live is more profound than the words you use. I think one thing about me is that I'm okay with few words. In a lot of situations, I like to be the observer, and the way I live my life is kind of how I like to, or I try to, and I do fail, but I try to show, I think as Catholics, being able to have someone say to us like that person's life is different, and I want to be like that, I think can be just a great thing.
Yeah. And I think that one of the ways that I see evangelization, if you want to talk about that, being most effective is when we actually do less talking about God. And I know that sounds really weird, but the people that I have found, and this isn't a brag, guys, please don't think that I'm humble bragging or anything like that, but I found that the people in my life that I have had a relationship with, and then inevitably they have decided to have a relationship with Jesus, I didn't have a whole ton of conversations with them at the very beginning, and even for some time, talking about God. And I know that my natural inclination is to just like blab about God all the time. Like, I want to talk about scripture. I want to talk about my Catholic faith. I want to talk about a personal relationship with Jesus, because I'm talkative. Like, I am the opposite of Carlos. Carlos is an observer and then kind of inserts himself at the right time. I am just like, I will just word salad you all day long. But I have found, especially as I've grown in my faith, just the ability to sit down and have dinner with people, or coffee, or just hang out and talk. It's like Carlos said, like, the people that are going to come to faith, people are going to come to faith a lot easier when they see our lives and be like, there's something about Tom that I want to be like Tom. Like, there's something different about him from the way that I am, and I want to be like that guy. And I got to figure out what it is. And they're going to ask a bunch of questions about, like, what do you do? Like, how do you, like, what's your job? How, like, what, da-da-da-da. And inevitably, all of that stuff's going to get filtered down into, like, why am I here? What's my purpose? What is faith all about? And then we can start talking about who Jesus is and how to have a relationship with him, because that's really important. Carm, what you got?
I was just going to say that's that song that we've sung in church, they will know we are Christians by, and the words that are in there, just by acting. I love that song. And I think it means this is how we, our persona, how we push ourselves out there. If we act what that song says.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And I think too, Linda, go ahead.
I just want to say the more personal my religion becomes to me, and it gets more and more personal all the time, the more I want to speak about it. Where before you were always say, two things you don't talk about: religion and politics. Okay, although, but the more personal it becomes to me, the more I want to talk about it, and not preach about it, but if I'm in a conversation with somebody, I'm no longer afraid to say, you need to draw some strength from God. You need to go back to your faith. You need, this is what helps you. You pray, and I never used to really talk a whole lot about that, but I do now, because it's become so personal to me that I feel that people should know that more, that this is what you need to do, for if you're something's going on in your life or whatever, the world needs to come back to this, and So that's where I kind of like with the personal and the, being private and personal, those are the, I'm no longer as private about my religion as I used to be.
That's good. What else? Who else has a thought? But yeah, Tom, go ahead.
I agree, with Carlos and what you were saying. I think in everybody, I think how you live your life might attract people to you and say, well, why are they living that way? There's something that attracts me to them. And whereas some people might be turned off by the preaching type thing or talking right off, if they observe how you are, they'll think, well, there must be something beyond that, and would draw them into wanting to know more. It would be just a natural flow into the conversation, I think.
Well, and it's also funny because we get into conversations with people all the time where we recommend things, right? Like you want to, it's your anniversary, it's coming up, and you want to go out to a nice dinner. What do? What's the first thing you usually do? Well, it's one of two things. You're either, if you're like me, I grab my phone and I look at Google reviews for places.
Can't relate.
Or the other thing I do is I talk to people I know and I ask them. I say hey, where's a good place to go to dinner? I because I'm still kind of new to the Solvay Lakeland area. I had a really big preconceived notion about a steakhouse that's housed within a Holiday Inn or a Best Western, wherever it is that Daniela's is. I can't remember but to me, I was like, I don't know if that sounds like a good idea. But everybody I've ever talked to about Daniela's is like, oh my gosh, that place is amazing. It's so good. You got to try it. You got to go. So why wouldn't I take your recommendation? And I think it's the same thing with us. We have to be willing to recommend our faith. We have to be willing to be bold and talk about it. But I mean, it's also reading the room, understanding when it's a good time to really pour out a lot and when it's time to maybe be reserved. Maybe sometimes it's good to be an Adam in the room and really just go for it. Maybe sometimes it's a lot better to be a Carlos and wait, literally just like he's doing right now, is he's waiting. He's waiting to jump in and add something into what I'm saying. I think that's a really important part of discerning how we live our faith. Father, what were you going to say?
I agree with you 100%, Adam. But in my agreement with you, I would say this. If someone said to me, yeah, you ought to go to Daniela's or something, I probably would do it. Okay? So that means that nobody is saying, gee, you ought to come to St. Marianne Cope. You see what I'm saying? That's exactly what I believe is not happening. So what you say, Adam, is absolutely true. If someone says to me, gee, you ought to go to the In-Between, it's wonderful. You ought to go to, Rosalia's Cucina in Skinny Atlas. It's wonderful. I probably am going to do it. Or if someone says, hey, let's go to Daniela's for dinner. Another couple, maybe a couple says to another couple, let's go to Daniela's Friday night. You do it. So what that means then, if what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, that nobody is saying the right thing for evangelization purposes.
Well, and the hardest part about it too is that's what we do, right? So somebody says, like Tom says, we're living our lives, somebody's drawn to what's going on within us, and then we do something like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic, or oh yeah, I go to St. Marianne Cope, you should come to Mass. It's the same as us saying, I'm going to go to you should go to Daniela's, or we should go to wherever. The recommendation is good. The invitation is best. So when we say you should go check out Daniela's, okay, I trust Walt's decision-making abilities. I trust his taste. If he says that Daniela's is a good place to eat and Walt says it, I'm going to go check it out. but there's no guarantee that I'm going to go check out Daniela's. But if Walt says to me, oh my gosh, I love eating at Daniela's, I get the same thing, I always get this, da 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 da. Hey, let's go on Friday night. That's a totally different experience than just a recommendation. The recommendation is good, the invitation and the accompaniment is best. And that's not a condemnation. When we talk about that in the context of church, I don't think it's a condemnation on any of us that conversation isn't happening. I think the biggest conversation is, how do we start having that conversation, right? Because I think that if I were to ask you on a scale from 1 to 5, 1, I'm wildly uncomfortable, 5, I'm ready to go all the time, where do you fall on the spectrum of how willing are you to invite people to church, whether it's coming to Mass or being involved in like a Christ Life series that we did or anything like that? I think that maybe sometimes we have a lot of hang-ups about that part of it, right? Would you agree with that?
I think the invitation is key. I mean, just look what we did a couple months ago, trying to get some more lectors and Eucharistic ministers in. I mean, we actually made a conscious effort to invite them to this. And that might spark people who really were on the fence or really weren't sure what they wanted to do. But if they're invited because someone saw something in them that was working or was ready to work, you know, that actually would bring them in. So I think in all aspects, I think the invitation part is key to work on any spark that might already be there.
Adam?
Yeah, go for it.
Betty here. You know, comparing it to a
you.
restaurant is kind of tough because that's just the first time. How about if there's a whole bunch of people that did go to Daniela's and had a bad experience and aren't going and are telling other people? That seems to be what happens in the Catholic Church, that we've lost a lot of people and they're not encouraging their children to come because they no longer feel it's necessary in their life. And a lot of that has to do with our society and computers, and a lot of it has to do with parents who were bored in church, so that when their kids say they're bored, well, that's a great excuse, so they just don't come. It's not a feeling that this is what I'm giving back to God. I'm worshiping Him to help me go through the next week. And you used to not have to think that as a Catholic growing up. It was because your parents said you had to go. And so I think it's very scary for people to have to come back into church and know what to do. That's why these newer churches that don't have organized religion behind them are more successful because they're so welcoming. You don't just have a protocol of when you sit, when you stand, listening to someone's preaching, listening to the same prayers. That's all scary for new people. So Father has said that before. We can't just go out in the community and say, oh, come to St. Cecilia's, come to Our Lady of Peace. That's too intimidating. Where a restaurant, you could a little easier because we have to eat every day. I think people, number one, we used to be much closer to death. Thinking of me as a kid, death was, our grandparents were with us much more, and we saw them dying, and we went to their funerals, and our family, death was just closer. And generations before that, even more so. Now, parents protect their children. They don't have them come to funerals. They're just not experiencing death. And that's when Father says, I'm concerned about your soul. They're not even thinking about that because they're trying not to think. One priest said about coronavirus, people are so afraid because they are really afraid of death. That's why it's such a big thing. So it's just a tougher thing to get people to want to praise the Lord. I'm done.
No, that's good. And you brought up a lot of good stuff, Betty, and I think there's a lot of room for conversation around that. Father, I know you're
Yeah.
itching to add something right there, and we'll go ahead and do that, but I also want to hear what other people have to say about what Betty said.
I would just say that Betty, was bringing up the subject of discipling people. So yes, you can't just bring them into a situation and not teach them the protocols. You're right. That we don't do that well. We just because most of us don't do it too well either. So if you don't do it too well, how can you teach someone to do it well? Yeah, you're right, Betty.
I think another thing too is when I hear, and it's not a bad argument, Betty, when I hear that, like when we have a formalized ritual behind liturgy, and people find that daunting, and people find that like a turn off. But how many, and I'm going to speak from my age bracket, like my peers, how many of my peers are willing to go to like a CrossFit gym and do a scheduled workout every day? They'll go in. The reason I know this is because, I mean, maybe my age group isn't the best. I know Mike Alberts and my mother-in-law both go to the same CrossFit gym. They walk into the gym, there's a board, and it has everything that you're going to do for that workout right there. And for some reason, we'll say, when it comes to getting fit, I can follow this regimen. Or like, I'm going to do a diet. I'm going to do the Atkins. Everybody remember the Atkins diet?
Yep.
And there's a protocol for the Atkins diet, and I got to do X, Y, and Z every day. Or I'm going to do keto, and I got to eat like this. We can follow regimen. We can follow prescription when we want. You know what I mean? And that's what it becomes, is why don't you want to do this? If you went to a doctor and the doctor said, you are pre-diabetic. If you don't change how you eat, you're going to become a diabetic. We change how we eat. We reduce our sugar intake. We stop eating carbs. But when we walk through a church door, we don't want to be told that we should sit or stand. I used to call it Catholic calisthenics. You sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand, kneel, we don't want to do that, because how dare you tell me what I'm supposed to do? But we can listen to people recommend things and tell us how to do things all the time. So again, it's understanding, I think a little bit is, and I'm going to shut up here in a minute, but part of it is understanding that there are people in my life that know better than me, and I need to be willing to accept their guidance on that. It's the same reason we were told to listen to teachers. It's the same reason why we're told to listen to doctors. We need to understand that there are people who are going to guide us and instruct us, and again, it is part, I think there's a lot of validity to what you said. What do you guys think?
It's a good analogy, Adam, about following prescriptions for the gym and the doctor and everything. But when it comes to mass, people some people are unwilling to do that. And when you figure the benefits of going to mass versus the benefits of going to a gym, both have their benefits, but you're right. People are more apt to maybe do something like that that's scripted than to sit through a mass.
Silence.
I know it's uncomfortable, right?
I'm not good with that awkward stuff.
Silence is okay, even on Zoom meetings.
Overall thinking, that's what we're doing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this is a real thinker
Yes.
session, isn't it?
Well, one of the things, and this is a thought that I wanted to pose to everybody, and maybe it's room for more discussion. I don't want to go too much longer and take up too much of a day, but do we also feel that there is room for us to practice our faith, live our faith, worship in ways that aren't liturgy, like that aren't the Mass. I'm not saying that we abandon the Mass in form of other forms of worship. I'm saying, is there room for a yes and? You know, one of the things that I did when I was in college is I took a class on improv. And one of the things that you learn when you learn to do improv is that you never say, when you're given a scenario and you're trying to act out a scenario with improv, if somebody asks you a question, you never say no. It's always yes and then you add in the thing that you're thinking. Right. So is there room for us in Catholicism to say the cornerstone, the central point of everything that we do is the Mass? Whether that's our once a week we're going on Sunday, whether we're a daily Mass participant, even if we're the type of person who can only come a certain amount of times during the year, that's the cornerstone. But that, in my opinion, when that's what we do on Sunday, when it's our Sunday commitment or obligation, we're taking 1 hour and giving it to God. But there's hundreds of other hours throughout the week. What are we doing with that? You know, we're making time for a ton of other things during that time. What are we doing with that time during the week? Are there ways for us to live our faith that will then make our faith more palpable, appetizing to people during the week? What do you think?
Well, after Mass, a lot has to do with how we act, how we treat people. Our kindness, everything like that, yeah.
That's good. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I think the Mass is very important to me as far as receiving the Eucharist, but I think that the other hours that you're not in Mass are more important of what you're doing. But I did have something I just wanted to say and pose to everybody. I'm not looking. How many of us, if someone came up to us and asked us to go to their church or go to their religion, would accept that invitation? And on the other side of that, how many of us have ever had that? Has anybody ever received that invitation from someone to go to another church or religion, you know, somewhere? I'm just curious about that, I guess. I mean, I personally, I never have been approached to go to another Mass or go anywhere else. On the other hand, I'm guilty of not inviting people to any of our services, okay? But I was just curious about that.
I was invited to go to Eastern Hills in Manlius, huge fundamentalist church. And I went and, you know, had a very positive experience of fellowship. The people were warm and inviting and immediately willing to disciple me.
Well, years ago, it was, you're a Catholic, you don't go to any church other than the Catholic Church.
Yep.
Or you're going to go to hell, you know. So if anybody invited us, we wouldn't go. I've been to other churches, but for funerals, weddings, stuff like that, but never for a Mass, you know.
So I wonder what you said, Father, where you had a very good experience and they were warm and inviting. And I wonder if an invitation like to come to our church would give them the same experience. Mm. They feel that way. And I think that sometimes is, yep. I think we need to be more inviting and more, you know, right now, I know it's difficult right now, but normally to, you know, when somebody new comes into Mass, sometimes it's, you know, more of a unapproachable feeling that you receive, you know.
For me, I don't like to find myself. I usually find myself in very awkward situations, but you know, but and I'm not the most comfortable with change and stuff like that, but I was invited to St. Mary's in Baldwinsville. And it was for me, it was very hard for me to come out. It's hard for me to come out of my shell sometimes, but you know, the organist there and the clergy there, they were just very welcoming, and the community was there. So, I mean, I think it only takes that one invitation, you know.
Well, I was one of the greeters at the last Mass, and I think that helps people. I know one lady, when she came in, oh, I used to live in Lakeland, and I'm here visiting, and she wanted to sit and visit with me. I think that helps people to make them feel welcome.
That's a good point. I know, Carm, you had something you wanted to say, and then Betty, you wanted to add something too. Carm, what were you going to add?
Well, I was going to piggyback on what Linda said. We're kind of sterile. We're not that warm, inviting atmosphere that, like, I've gone to Abundant Life to a funeral there, and I personally know people that were Catholics that now go to that church, and their reasoning was because they were so warm, so welcoming, and that we're kind of sterile. We're just, I don't know. This is just, you know, popped into my head that we need to be, like Linda said, more welcoming. And like Pat said, with the we did, when Father Fetcher was there also, we used to have the greeters at the doors and that, and it did help. But then we got away from it, and we go into our pew, we sit there. And Father, you've mentioned many a time, we don't look around, especially when we were having those things with the safety, where the fire hydrants, you know, fire extinguishers and everything are. We don't look around. We go in, we sit down, and we've got blinders on. We look mainly at the altar. And then when we leave church, that's it. We don't see those people again.
I laugh at the time that the 6'7", 350-pound guy was at Mass, and he went out the side door, so I didn't get to meet him or shake his hand. And I asked someone, I said, hey, who was that guy? You know, 6'7", he must have weighed 350. And about 10 people said, oh, I didn't see him. The man was a freaking mountain, and nobody saw him. You gotta be kidding. You know, I don't get that. I just don't get it. The guy was literally 6 feet 7 inches tall. He was a mountain.
Well, we talked after Mass on Sunday. We talked about it. Father and Carlos and I were in the back. And we mentioned that we saw faces that we had never seen before at Mass. Even now, there were people who were at the 10 o'clock that we had never seen before.
Yep.
And it's difficult, and I will say this, it is, especially right now, it's difficult for us to go and do the handshake, and we don't have a coffee hour afterwards. So extending the hospitality in that corporate sense is really difficult right now. But it's happening. And that's, and I want to echo that what Carm said, that we're not looking around, we're not paying attention. Even when we talk about a story, and this is not a condemnation of anybody, but when we talk about Robert, who just recently became a Christian, he became a Catholic 3 days ago, excuse me. He was in our parish and nobody spoke to him. You know, we weren't, I'm not saying I'm part of that. Nobody talked to him. And it is difficult. I also understand that it's difficult to put yourself out there and go up to a stranger and say welcome and, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here, because it feels invasive, right? It feels really invasive to get in people's business and ask them a bunch of questions, especially when they're a stranger. But maybe it's just so much as we can't handshake right now, but just going up and waving, saying like, hi, I'm Adam. I'm so glad you're here. Or something like that, you know, like, and there's something to it. And maybe that's a bigger conversation that we can start having as a church, as a parish community, saying like, how do we really extend the invitation? How do we really practice radical hospitality so that people are going to want to be there? Because they're showing up. People are showing up. Even with masks on, people are showing up. And we have room to do it. And I just don't want us to, one sec, Walt, I want to get it, but I just don't want us to fall into this atrophy where we're just like, well, this is just the way that it is, and maybe if we ride this out long enough, we can get through it. I don't want us to fall into that. Walt, what do you got to say?
I think, yes, Betty, did you have something, Betty?
Yeah, Betty, where are we going to add? Hold on, unmute yourself, Betty. Hold on.
Nope.
Hey, Betty, you got to unmute yourself. Oh.
To unmute. Okay, I think our funerals and the liturgies and the luncheons are everything we're talking about. We do them really well. We're friendly, we're open, and it doesn't bring them back on Sundays. So for me, I'm saying, we all have to pray that they want to come back. It's in God's hands, because we've done everything we can to be what we're saying. And maybe we aren't asking God to help get them to come to church. So yeah, that's me. That's my thought.
Lori, what'd you want to add?
We were talking about, you mentioned the 10 o'clock mass and other masses when we see unfamiliar faces. The one positive I think that has come out of this having to register people and greet people at the door and usher people is, I've been at all 3 masses every weekend. And it's been a great opportunity when those people come in to say, hi, welcome. You actually find out their names, and say to them, geez, I hope we see you back next week. So my hope is when we get over this COVID pandemic, which I know it'll be a while, but I firmly believe at some point we will. That's why I really feel strongly that we need to bring greeters back into the church, and at all masses, ushers, because it's making that connection when they first walk in the door. And they always say, your first 5 minutes of meeting somebody makes the everlasting impression. And if we can be a welcoming force as we're opening the door and welcoming them into our church, it's got to be a step in the right direction.
Great point. Mary Beth, what about you?
Well, I agree with Lori and myself. I've been invited to and attended at least 3 different denominational churches services. And I've got to say that the enthusiasm and the excitement that they have for their faith, rather than the Catholic faith is kind of, some of us are enthusiastic, but we've been taught to be sedate, to be respectful, to be, quiet. And these other churches don't do that before the service. They're very alive. They're very welcoming. Oh my goodness, I've never seen you before. I can't wait for you to see our services. I hope you'll come back over and over again. Who brought you in? Who asked you to come? And, just they're all alive and buzzing about God and about Jesus before Mass. And they're coming in an hour early and getting coffees and spending time together before they go into the service. And then they go into the service with this enthusiasm. And it's something, you do see it in some of our people, but it's not an overwhelming aspect of how we experience Mass.
I think those are all really good points. And I think that there's a lot of credit to what Betty said, and again, it's a yes and. We continue to offer what we have and consider how we can offer more, but also incorporate prayer into that as well, because it's if we don't ask the Holy Spirit to do what only the Holy Spirit can do, it's not going to bear fruit. But we also have to remember that, and I agree, our hospitality, when we try and offer people a warm and welcoming experience when they're going through loss or grieving and stuff like that, those are all really important. But those aren't, and again, this is going to sound bad, but there is a certain amount of marketing and brand awareness that is involved in being part of a church. And that is how any organization grows, is understanding you have a brand, you have a message, you have a marketing language. Yeah. And it's not going to grow unless you promote that. And we have to realize that some of these things are internal marketing tools, right? So like our funeral luncheons, I agree, are second to none, but those aren't for bringing people back to Mass. Those are going to be for the people who are part of our community, maybe haven't been for a while, but they need that welcoming, they need the consolation. But how do we, and again, I think that too, you know, Mary Beth brought up, like at a Protestant service, like, you know, like there's this high energy, and their worship and their style of service is very different from what we experience at Mass, but they don't have to do what everybody else does to promote yourself. Like we don't have to have like a rock concert every Mass. We don't have to have smoke and lights, and we don't have to have, like my wife's sister and her family, they go to Vineyard right over there in the other side of Lakeland, and like they have a great facility, and they've got a really cool kids program, and they've got all this stuff that they can offer. But I was not attracted to that experience. I didn't enjoy that experience because of all of that. It was nice, but I really did enjoy that welcoming presence. You know, like, hey, it's so good to see you. I'm so-and-so, having conversations, people willing to talk to me, even though I wasn't part of their church, you know? I think there's a lot of room for that. I think that's a good conversation for us to continue to have, is how do we take those things that work really well and incorporate them? Yeah, go ahead.
At some of the churches, like when I was going down to Myrtle Beach and you go to a different church, they always ask, do we have any visitors? And they would you would raise your hand and you would introduce yourself, and everybody you were welcomed from the altar as well as from the body of the church. So maybe sometimes, you know, not every Mass, but maybe once in a while, we could say, do we have any visitors with us today? You know, before the you know, and then invite them once we can start having the coffee hour again, to stay and have fellowship with us. But that might be something, you know, that way everybody, because, you know, we come in, now we're coming in one entrance, but in the past we were coming in, you know, 3 different doors, and you don't get to see all the people because of the way we sit around the church. This way, at least we're acknowledging that we do have a visitor in the church.
I think the Sagneri had something that they wanted to add.
I was in California in February and went to church there, and that's exactly what Carmen said that they had done. The first thing that they did was greeted me when I came in the door. The second thing was that before the priest started the Mass, he asked if there was any visitors. When I stood, asked me where I was from, I got response from some other people that were sitting around me. One lady was from New Jersey. And then they brought me they brought a basket over and said, choose something from here. And it happened to be a rosary, all in a little package and what have you. I thought that was kind of cute. Plus invited me to the luncheon, not the luncheon, but the coffee hour right outside of church at the same time. The same thing happened when we were in Florida. We went to church there, and the very first thing, and it was a place where it was a cathedral, it was a basilica, and it was a place where it was mostly all visitors. And the priest started out the whole thing this way, saying, you know, where are you from? And everybody got a chance to say, I'm from Syracuse, I'm from Nairobi, they were from all over the country and all over the world. And then also invited to the coffee hour afterwards. It seemed to be very friendly and just a nice way to invite you to come back again, because it was just a friendly group.
I'm going to call him out because he's been surprisingly quiet. Mike, what do you think?
Surprisingly quiet. I agree with everything. I've certainly been to spots where I have a great story that I'll tell you sometime about me visiting another Catholic church down in Washington, D.C. The bottom line was, real quickly, I walked into the church, and my brother was with me, and he actually got there a little late, and I asked him, how did you find me in this large congregation? And because I was the only Caucasian there. and it was a very different experience. So at the end of after communion, so my brother and I are sitting next to each other. Priest gets up and says, "Well, do we have any visitors today?" And he looks straight at us. I mean, and just basically called us out. So we were down there to watch a Giants-Redskins football game, and he called us right out. He really had no choice but to stand up and tell him who I was, where I was from, and why I was there. And he actually knew the priest at St. Joseph's and Camillus at the time, because he knew he was familiar with upstate New York. Whole other story, but it was funny. So I mean, yeah, we definitely could do that. I sit here thinking, it's funny. What makes the people on this call different? I think of my own family, and I think of being raised by the same set of parents, and we're all at different spots in pursuing our faith and how we practice. And why are some one way and why are others another way? I'm not condemning them. They're my siblings. I love them all, but we're all in different spots. And it's like, what am I exposed to? I mean, the same kind of upbringing. What makes me different? What makes them different? Those are just questions I ask myself. But I do think we need to be more. I think Carm said it well. We're sterile sometimes. We're not as warm and fuzzy. And I don't know if that's a good thing or bad, but I think that's okay. I agree with Lori also. I think probably the greeting of people when they come in is a good thing. It's probably a good thing that's come from all this. So I agree with everything. So,
Gloria, you said you wanted to add something.
Yes. I think a lot of people who have fallen away, our own people who have fallen away, find a staleness in the Mass. They'll say they would definitely identify themselves as Catholics, but they want the message. They don't want the format. They get tired of the format of the Mass. Now, I think I would like to see, whether they would watch it or not, I don't know. But we have a lot of footage now of Masses. And I think we could, even for anyone just looking, to explain the Mass as it goes through. For example, you have all these Masses taped, and you could superimpose information on theirs. The priest is now doing this, and it signifies this, because it has become, I forgot who said it's a sterile experience. If people knew what it actually, it's a story. I mean, when I look at the Mass, I feel it's a story, but it's not that obvious, and maybe because some of the things there are so ancient that they are not relatable. And I mean, I don't know, that's just my position. I'm fine with it, but then I know that I find it very stilted. And
I think that that's a really good point. And I think that there's a lot of room along that journey as we invite people to expose them to that. Just one kind of final thought I wanted to share with you guys. And this had nothing to do with me going to a church. This actually had to do, years ago, I was working at a Steubenville conference in Arizona where I used to live. And I was kind of on like a little bit of a break, and Kate brought Gus. Maggie wasn't born yet. And she brought Gus to visit me kind of around lunchtime. And we were walking on the campus where the Steubenville conference was. And these two guys came up who identified themselves as Muslims. And they had this big thing, like a dish of dates. I was like, and they came over like, hey, would you guys like some of these dates? They're fresh dates. I was like, I've never had dates before. And they were explaining that they were handing them out because they were in the middle of fasting for Ramadan. So they were observing Ramadan, and it's part of their practice of faith that they don't eat during the holy time of Ramadan. They fast the whole time. But they wanted to share, and these are a cultural thing from their particular mosque that was very like relevant to them, and they really enjoyed it and they wanted to share it with people. So they said, like, while we're not eating, we want to share this food that we would normally get to eat with other people. And we had this really great conversation with these two guys. And I mean, I didn't go to their mosque. I didn't go visit them and participate in the service. And I don't know if that would necessarily have been appropriate, but just the fact that they were willing to just go out and do that stuff is remarkable. And I think that that's really where this conversation leads to, is like, where is that point of boldness that we're willing to take up as a church, where we could just go, I'm not saying we go knock on people's doors and tell them they're going to go to hell if they don't go to mass, but are we willing to just go? Like these two guys didn't care. They weren't trying to push anything or an agenda. They just shared about who they were. They shared that they were Muslims and that they were observing Ramadan. They wanted to just kind of meet people and tell them about the things that God had done for them that changed their lives. And I was like, wow, this is really remarkable. And the dates were really good. So, like I had never had a date before in my life, and I always thought, like, they're like, ew, like, I don't want to, that's gross. It's not something I enjoy. And now I kind of like dates, So again, there's that willingness to be bold that and again, that's a big conversation that we can continue, but I think that this is really good, especially in the context of, is faith personal or private, that we have these large discussions about hospitality and welcoming and stuff like that. But I really appreciate you guys being here today and giving your feedback and giving your perspective. We went a little bit longer than we usually do, but that's okay. I think it's really good when we get to have discussions and talk as neighbors and members of the same parish. I think this is really good. So I just want to say thank you to you guys for being here. I know Father and Carlos had to jump off and handle something real quick. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I encourage you guys to come back next week. And if you've got topics that you'd like us to talk about, whether maybe you want Father to put together like a quick teaching about a topic, like you guys were doing today, how you guys kind of threw out those questions, or maybe you have a topic for a big discussion for us to talk about. If you go to the Coffee Talk website, stmariannecope.org/Coffee Talk, where you hit that button to join this conversation every week, there's a button right there that says, hey, I've got a topic, and you can throw it right in there. It doesn't require you to enter your name or anything like that. It can be totally anonymous, but like, hey, you want to talk about, like, what's the big difference between us and the Baptists, or, whatever it is you want to talk about, we can totally cover that. Just drop it in there and we can have a big conversation about it. But thanks so much, you guys, for coming today and hanging out. And we'll see you guys this weekend, either online or in person at Mass. Have a good one.
Thank you.